Hi guys, welcome back. So it's that time again, team report time, where I summarise how I think all the nations did in this Six Nations and also how it sets them up going into the World Cup later this year. But before I get into that, I have to congratulate the winners of the RugbyAnalyst Guinness Pint Predictor League. It was great fun. Hopefully we'll get to do it again for the World Cup, and also I think I'll probably do a fantasy World Cup as well, try and get two competitions going on at once there. But congratulations to Jack Kavanagh, as is probably right to be, an Irishman winning the league, then Nathan Cameron, then Joe Concannon, another Irishman. Well done there. Just 1 point in it. Jack taking it by 230 points to 229. Well done you. I actually had a fairly decent last round. I crept up to 70th out of 670 something, so not a complete washout there. And I actually got fairly close, within a couple of points of most of my predictions on Super Saturday. But I will try and do better next time. But well done, Jack. Good stuff. So working my way up from the bottom of the table, we start with Italy. They pick up the wooden spoon, not getting a win in this campaign, which they'll be absolutely gutted with, because they started actually really well with probably their best performance of the Six Nations, really rattling the French. And Capuzzo really at his slippery best. An Olivan yellow card gave them a sniff at an upset, but France did enough to hold on, and they went on and got better and better. And really for Italy, it kind of got a little bit worse. They had one good sniff against Wales, made great breaks, but didn't execute enough, and that was their demise and kind of the story of their championship, really. You've got to say, Italy's attack showed some amazing intricacies, really exciting. They've got lots of ability. They've got lots more quality players now because their under-20 system, their youth system is really kicking through the players. You can see again in the under-26 nations, Italy are doing really well. So they say they can compete at the highest level. They can compete at the highest level, and I think they will continue to compete at the highest level, but they need to win. As harsh as it sounds, but they probably deserve that wooden spoon because, yeah, it's no good just looking organised and slick unless you can bring in results. So, Kieran Crowley's coaching team, I think they just need to think about some of their tactics. Clearly, the players are buying into what they want them to do, but I just think that maybe they're a bit too complex at times and they need to bring in a bit more efficiency. A good case in point is their exit play from kickoffs, and it really was quite frustrating. They almost invariably play a number of very risky passes deep in their own 22, pull behinds, blind passes from forwards. But the top defences, they know this is going to happen. They put pressure on them. It's rare that Italy are going to get a breakaway from this position, and they can put themselves in real trouble making an early error deep in their 22. And in a similar vein, at the other end of the pitch, when they do get their chances, when they do get into the 22, I think maybe they need to consider tightening up a bit, going for a bit more of a grind finish occasionally rather than looking for that killer play. So I think maybe they just need to wind in their ambition occasionally and know when to turn it on and when to tighten it up. If they get that right and tactically tighten up, I think they've got the players to be really competitive in the World Cup actually, but it's going to be a tough call for them to get out of their pool, of course. But next Six Nations, they absolutely should be targeting 1 or 2 wins at least. So you've got to say this was a disappointing campaign in that respect for them. Okay, next on to Wales. And Welsh fans, forgive me, but in some ways they're actually fairly similar to England, having changed their coach in search of better performances, but the results not really going anywhere. So Gatland, to be fair to him, certainly shook things up, trying lots of different players. Not afraid to drop established players, but not really got any definitive answers from that either. The systems don't look that well developed in attack, and they're fairly blunt compared to other teams. That being said, Gatland has created good exposure to some young talent. Schwinzer didn't really have the impact he might have. David Jenkins showed some promise. I think he's still probably a couple of years off his physical best, but he's definitely going to be one for the future. But maybe the young pairing of Hawkins and Grady is the most exciting thing. Hawkins in particular looks like he's got the physical attributes and the skill to be used in many different ways, and that's what an attack could be built around if they stick with Hawkins at 12. Now, some of the older players, it's tricky. They've still got something to offer for sure. They're not completely shot, but they're definitely not the athletes they were either. Ken Owens, Alan Wynne-Jones, Tipperick, Halfpenny, to name a few. You could stick with them, but are you really going to win a World Cup with them? It's a tricky one. Or do you just build for the future and write this World Cup off? Their number one fly half, normally Dan Biggar, had a very poor championships by his standards. Josh Adams, for example, once a prolific try scorer for Wales, looks to have lost his edge a bit. So lots and lots of questions. What does he do? Does he stick? Does he twist? I'm not sure, to be honest. Let me know what you think he should do. But at least they got that win against Italy, and they actually went toe-to-toe with the French for a bit as well, actually. So not all terrible, but they were woeful versus Ireland and Scotland. The game versus England was a tough one to take. They seemed to play into England's hands, giving Freddie Stewart a field day at the back, an anemic kicking game rather than really going after them like they did versus the French. So at the moment, you've got to say they look a mediocre team, struggling to find enough top players, a little bit in transition, if you like to use that term, between the youth and the older. I told you they're a bit like England, but yeah, in that way they probably are. Now, Gatland's got some huge decisions to make personnel-wise, because he needs to dial in that 23 for the World Cup fairly soon, and he's got big decisions in almost every area. So, a lot to be improved for Wales. Now on to England, and whatever way you look at it, it was another poor Six Nations for England. Looking back on the first game against Scotland, Scotland were the better team, but it could have gone either way. England were fairly close. The big difference for me being the individual attacking threat that Scotland brought. We're obviously going to remember that amazing Van der Merwe wonder try. Another disappointment for me is there were two very exciting back three that they could have really got into the Six Nations. Hassel-Collins played a bit, but they didn't get the ball in his hands in good positions. Arundel only came into it at the end, so I don't think we've really seen the best of them. Hopefully they'll continue to develop them, but certainly they didn't get much from them in this Six Nations. Now, post round 3, there were signs that England were getting a lot better. Their team was coming together. We had Ludlam stepping up on the blind side, Willis looking like a bit of a beast in defence at open side. Ollie Chesham was looking great. Ollie Lawrence was looking great. And then the big test was, how do they stack up to the French? And the answer was emphatic. They're nowhere near. So that was just a huge crushing body blow. You can't really underestimate how much that really, dented their confidence and, brought them crashing back down to ground, which maybe they really needed. At least England made a fight of it versus Ireland with a fairly basic game plan, but maybe that's what they're going to have to do going forward. But we'll talk about that in later videos. Anyway, it does beg the question, do England fans just accept that they are kind of a second-rate team who can make a battling effort, or are they going to push for more and try and reach to the heights of the likes of Ireland and France? Either way, Borthwick's got an awful lot to do if they're going to become any sort of threat for the World Cup. Now on to Scotland, and I've got to say I absolutely love watching Scotland. They've developed into one of the most exciting attacking teams in the world, and the reality is this is probably the best Scottish team they've ever had, and I think you have to give Gregor Townsend a lot of credit for the now genius move to scrap the kind of steady centres of Johnson and Harris and go all in with Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones, give Finn Russell, their magician, all the tools he needs, and it looks like the final piece in the puzzle. They scored some amazing tries. That combination of homegrown talent and talent that's come through other nations' systems is a pretty strong mix. Whether you think that's right or wrong, it's perfectly within the rules, and they've really come up trumps with their team, with their personnel. And even though I'd say they performed really well in this Six Nations, the stark reality is that they actually blew their chance of going into the last round with a winning chance. That crunch game in round 4, where they pushed Ireland really, really hard in the first half. But despite Ireland having a lot of injuries in the game, they had Van der Fleer throwing in, they had Healy hooking in the scrum, they were still blown away, so that was a tough pill to take. And essentially, they've just got to win those games if they want to win tournaments. So they're clearly a better side than the bottom 3, but there's definitely a step up to the top 2. And going into the World Cup, they're going to have to make a step up because they are in that pool of death. So it's make or break for Scotland, their best team for ages, but they just need to win when it matters most. Now on to the top 2, France and Ireland, by far the best 2 teams in the Six Nations. And the basic summary is France started fairly slowly and they built to a terrifying crescendo with 2 thumping performances against England and Wales, I thought. And all the pieces are starting to slot into place. We've got Dante now emerging as a world-class inside centre. Flamand came to the party and they've still got Woki to come back, so that second row is looking really stacked. Dupont's by far the best scrum half in the world, maybe the best rugby player in the world, just looks good at everything. The decision to get Ramos back in the team to slot the goals has seemed to be a good one as well, plus he's offering a lot in attack. And in my opinion, they're probably the best team at scoring from relatively simple plays and sometimes from absolutely nothing. The power, the offloads, the individual flair, it's just too good for so many teams. Even if you think you're containing them, they can just explode at the drop of a hat. And I don't think there is a doubt that this team can absolutely lift their home World Cup, but they're going to have to come to the party right from the off when it matters the most. They do have the odd error-strewn game in their locker, and that one-off drop in form in a knockout game could be curtains in the World Cup, so they've just got to stay right on it all the time. A lot of pressure on them, but they're capable of absolutely winning that World Cup. And finally, on to the Grand Slam champions. What a time to be an Irish rugby fan. I mean, they beat the All Blacks in the series in New Zealand. They go unbeaten in the autumn series. And now a beautiful Grand Slam. Interesting that their under-20s also completed the Grand Slam. It's just showing this Irish system is absolutely purring. The way they dispatched France, their closest rivals, was impressive, but some of you have said there were some dubious reffing decisions there, but there's nothing Ireland could have done about that. But maybe even more impressive was that second half versus Scotland, where they were under all sorts of adversity and they didn't skip a beat and they monstered that second half. That was so good. You could argue maybe a blot on the copybook was the jitters they had versus England down to 40 men, and the nerves definitely kicked in and they got very tight. However, this is the sort of pressure situation they'll have in a World Cup knockout match, so good to experience it now and make sure they don't do that tightening up again. But anyway, virtually all of their players kind of had stormers, maybe with the exception of Furlong, who looked a bit rusty. But Dan Sheehan, Ryan, Van der Fleer, Doris in the forwards, they were world class. They've got their back 3 nailed now, with Hansen, Lowe and Keenan offering a bit of everything. They also seem to have solved the problem of backup to Sexton in Ross Byrne. He looks very, very comfortable there. Murray stepped up in the absence of Gibson Park, and they looked great when Gibson Park came back as well. It's just great to see every player in a system knowing exactly what they're doing and oozing confidence. Probably the biggest issue now is just getting everyone to the World Cup fit. They've got the squad, they've got the depth, but Irish fans know that even though they're in a great position, they still face that daunting pool of death with South Africa and Scotland. Although if they play like they've been doing in this Six Nations, they should get out of that pool at least. But can they keep it going? Can they keep the streak going all the way through to the World Cup final and lift that William Webb Ellis trophy? That would be absolutely amazing. Anyway, that's my take on all the teams in this Six Nations and how they are looking in preparation for the World Cup. Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you next time.